It is my pleasure to welcome Peter Turchin to the show. He is a complexity scientist who studies a field you may not be familiar with called Cliodynamics. And we'll get into what that means here in just a moment. He's published several books. Back in 2010, when Nature magazine asked leading scientists to provide a 10-year forecast, Peter used his models to predict that America was in a spiral of social disintegration that would lead to a breakdown of political order around 2020. It's pretty interesting how that prediction seems to have come true, and the years since have proved that his prediction is more and more accurate. So we're going to dive into a lot of interesting topics today. Peter, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the show from Connecticut, right?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Jason. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you. So let's talk a little bit about Cliodynamics first, or being a complexity scientist. Before we started, I asked you how you would describe what you do. You know, if you're at a cocktail party, someone says, "What do you do?" Well, you say you're a complexity scientist. But more specifically, it's Cliodynamics, right?
That's correct. That's what that's the new field within which I and my colleagues work now.
And so that's the study where you research cultural evolution, economic history, macro sociology, mathematical modeling, and historical processes. I mean, this is quite an area, but they are so connected. I guess the one that people might argue is not connected so much as mathematics. So maybe you want to start there. And I was reading on your website why mathematics is so important to this study. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So Cliodynamics comes from Clio, who was the muse of history, according to the Greeks. And dynamics is simply the science of change. Well, history is about how things change with time. And dynamics is essentially studying this using the mathematical models and also analysis of data. Historians, sociologists, great thinkers of the past have proposed many explanations for why things happened the way they did. So, for example, everybody knows about the collapse of the Roman Empire. One German historian collected more than 200 explanations for why Roman Empire fell. But the problem with history has been that it has not really systematically used the scientific method. I mean, there are lots of explanations, but we don't know which explanations are good and which are bad. And the scientific approach essentially is to choose which theories work better. And how do we know that? Well, we use the method of scientific prediction, in which we extract the predictions from different theories that assume different mechanisms of decline, for example. All right, and then we compare those predictions to data. Now, the reason we need mathematics is because human societies are complex systems. Right, they have many moving parts that interact in nonlinear ways, and that means that trying to understand the dynamics of human societies without mathematical apparatus is impossible. The human brain is not equipped to do that. This means that all the rival theories that explain anything about history, they need to be first translated into dynamical models, and then we can extract predictions. Then we know that predictions follow from premises, assuming you've done your math right. All right, so that's essentially the essence of Cliodynamics. It's history as science, where we translate different explanations into mathematical models, and then we test the predictions from those mathematical models using data.
Okay, so let's take the 2010 example when you made this prediction. What did you see back in 2010, and what was your prediction specifically?
Yeah, let's step back and talk about some of the broad patterns that we have seen in our analysis of historical data. Complex human societies organized as states have been around for about 5,000 years. And they can function quite well for a while, maybe 100 years or so, sometimes less, sometimes more. But inevitably, at some point, things start falling apart and societies enter what I call end times. Why? The most common sign of approaching crisis is what we call elite overproduction. Essentially, this is when there are too many people vying for the fixed number of power positions. It's like a game of musical chairs, except you don't remove chairs as the game progresses, but you keep adding players. So you can imagine, so you start with maybe 11 players for 10 chairs, then 20 players, 30 players, 40 players, and so on. So we can talk about details, how one defines elites and how one can quantitatively study the elite dynamics. But essentially, to answer your question, what I saw back in 2010 was that United States has been developing this particular sign as well as some others. We can talk about them too. And when we put them in a model that we have constructed for the dynamics of such societies, the model indicated that these trends would eventually, within 10 years plus minus, lead to some kind of social disruption and political turbulence that we have seen many times in previous societies in our data.
So when you say elite overproduction, that's kind of an interesting phrase. Few people would argue with the concentration of wealth argument. There's a lot of that that's been going on lately. Compared to history, though, it may not be that bad, but compared to recent history, it's a lot worse. Do you mean that the elites are just becoming so productive that they're able to corner markets and assets and resources, or what do you mean by that?
Not quite. Well, okay. First of all, who are the elites? Elites, defined in sociology, simply is the small proportion of people, 1-2%, who concentrate social power in their hands. So think about, yes, the proverbial 1% in the United States. That's one example. But other examples include the Mandarin class in Imperial China or medieval nobility in France and England. So essentially, these are people who concentrate power. Now, power, you mentioned wealth. Wealth is only one source of social power because we define four different flavors of power.
Yeah, what are those flavors? That's interesting.
Yeah, so first of all, the obvious one is coercion, military power, right? When you can force people to do your will. Second one is economic power, when you can pay people to do what you want them to do. Third one is administrative and political power. Essentially, you can use the organizations to issue orders. And the final one, which is the most soft one, but also extremely powerful, is persuasion or ideological power. And so different segments of elites tend to focus on different types of power. And within our society, United States, and actually this is true for most capitalist democratic societies, the Western societies, the ruling class or the governing elite is typically a coalition between economic elites, people who have wealth, and administrative elites, people who are in positions of politicians, also bureaucrats, people like that. And in different countries, the balance of power tends to shift. But United States is fairly unusual in the extent to which the economic power dominates politics in our country. I have a whole chapter in my book, End Times, that came out about 3 weeks ago, arguing that by this point, the United States is essentially a plutocracy. It's a society governed by wealth holders.
By the way, I would agree with you, and because those wealth holders have so much other power besides their actual money, right? We can talk about lobbyists, we can talk about buying off scientists and academics all day long. You know, I talked about that many years ago on this show after reading a Citibank report. And it made this prediction in maybe 2007 or 8 that America would become a plutocracy. and some would argue a kleptocracy. So take your pick. They're not too dissimilar, I guess. But here we are, and that's quite interesting.
Well, I would not call America a kleptocracy. The example I used in my book of a kleptocracy was Afghanistan just before the takeover by Taliban a year ago. All right, that was a kleptocratic elite. In our society, the dominance by wealth is well known and has been commented by many people, many economists, like Paul Krugman, for example, have argued that America has become a plutocracy, and there are some very good political science studies that show. For example, I'll just mention Martin Gillen's and his book Influence and Affluence, where he shows statistically that America is a plutocracy.
Okay. All right. So where do we go with that? We're going to assume plutocracy is bad, right? Without going into that tangent.
I don't assume that something is good and bad. I'm a scientist, so I try to study this in neutral terms.
You're not making value judgment on it, but well, I'll say it's bad then.
It all depends. America has been governed by wealth since its inception, essentially. But at different times, American elites have been acting either more pro-socially for the benefit of the whole society, or more selfishly for the benefit of themselves. And so plutocracy is not necessarily bad. It can change and does change with time.
Now, Baselane, our sponsor, it is the #1 banking platform built for real estate investors. It's banking, online rent collection, bookkeeping, tax reporting, analytics, and more. You can enjoy real-time cash flow analytics on your properties. You can get ready for tax season with automated bookkeeping and financial statements ready for your CPA. Join more than 40,000 real estate investors who trust Baselane to manage their rental property finances. Go to baselane.com/Jason for a chance to win a $500 Amazon gift card. Yeah, okay, fair enough. So where are we going? I think, the big thing people always want to know is what's coming. What do we expect? How do we plan for it? What can we do about these forces that are shaping society and will likely continue to? Well, the first thing where we're going first.
The first thing that we need to understand is what are those forces that shape our societies. So let's go back to 2010 when I made this forecast. And let me explain a little bit what the forecast and the model which produced it was based upon. Okay. So by that point, the data showed that if you look at the last 100 years of the United States history, until, roughly speaking, late 1970s, the wages of workers grew together with GDP per capita, or alternatively, thinking about it, with productivity. Many people have seen this striking graph where the wages and productivity grow together until 1970s, and then suddenly they depart. The productivity continues to increase, wages stagnate and even decline. Right. So what happens to all that extra wealth produced by this gap between wages and productivity?
It goes to the top, the people that own the businesses.
Exactly. It goes to the economic elites. I call it the wealth pump. It's the perverse wealth pump that started pumping riches from the poor to the rich. Now, first of all, there are three problems with that. The most obvious one is that we have conditions of popular immiseration. And this is really an absolute, in many ways, an absolute way, because the quality of life, especially as measured by biological factors, so such as life expectancy and things like that, has started to decline for the majority of the population. So that breeds a lot of popular discontent, and that is something that political entrepreneurs could harness in order to advance their careers. But that's the most obvious thing. The second problem, which is less obvious, is that we have been creating huge numbers of super wealthy. Over the past 40 years, we have the numbers of decamillionaires. These are people whose worth is $10 million or more, has increased tenfold. All right, the population grew 40%, but the number of decamillionaires increased tenfold.
And when you share that statistic, are you adjusting for inflation?
Yes.
Okay.
So this comes from Edward Wolfs, who's an economist at NYU, I believe, and he has been doing this very careful study. So he has looked at the different gradations of wealth: 10 millions, 5 millions, or 1 million, and all of them have grown quite dramatically.
Yeah, and look, I don't think anybody who's aware of what's going on would deny that we're sort of living in this like mass affluent society. But the problem is we're also living in a mass poverty society at the same time. And the middle is where it's coming from on both ends. Most of the middle moves down, a few move up. That's the problem.
Precisely. Yeah. This has been known as the hollowing out of the middle class. So now, why is it, on the face of it, having lots of wealthy people is good? Obviously, it's good for them. But why is it bad for the society? Well, many wealthy people have political ambitions. They either run themselves as candidates. Donald Trump, of course, is the best known example, but Michael Bloomberg, also failed candidates like Steve Forbes. They are all examples of this. But also they can run other candidates. So when you have too many wealthy people, the competition for political offices starts to heat up because there are now many more aspirants for those political
and it is ridiculous what they are spending to get elected. I mean, it is absurd.
We can trace the cost of elections. It just keeps going up and up because it reflects this competition.
It's insane. I remember many years ago when Michael Huffington ran for Senate in California, Ariana Huffington, his wife at the time. I remember hearing about the money he spent on that campaign to get what at the time was, I think, $120,000 a year job. I mean, it's just absurd. It shows you how there is so much wealth to be made working in government, right? Because no one would spend $25 million to get elected to a $130,000 job or whatever, right? It's a complete absurdity. That can't be driven by just ego. It's more than that. It's money too. Go ahead.
So not everybody of those extra, 10 times as many wealthy, not all of them want to run for office, but as you increase the number of the pool, the number of candidates also increases. So for example, in 2016, there were 17 major candidates in the Republican presidential primaries. All right, Republican candidates in the presidential primaries. That was unprecedented at the time. Of course, in 2020, there were even more Democratic candidates. So this is why is elite overproduction bad? Because some competition for elite position is good because we want to select better people, right? But too much competition becomes corrosive. In this game of musical chairs, just imagine as the number of candidates increases fourfold over the chairs, there is so much jostling and so much temptation to start breaking rules, all right, that somebody will start breaking rules. It will inevitably deteriorate into a fist fight or something.
But Peter,
that's what we see in the political arena.
Sure. I'm not disagreeing with you, but the flip side of that argument is, isn't that more democratic that we have more candidates, more choices, more people have access to run for president or any other office for that matter? People don't know this, right? And I remember reading an article about it many years ago that something like 7,000 people run for president every 4 years. 7,000 people, people you never hear about, of course, right? Yeah. That never raise any money, that never get any airtime. But a lot of people run for president and every other office for that matter. Isn't that a good thing that there's more choice, more people have access to participate in government?
The problem is that it is not a good thing when there are too many people running for a fixed number of positions. And we see this. Remember, I mentioned that elite overproduction is the factor which is the common theme in all the crises. We have now close to 200 crises in our database of past societies over the past few thousand years. And elite overproduction is a ubiquitous feature leading to all of them. So too much competition is really bad. It's corrosive. And the reason is because it's human nature. Humans are not your mathematical agents in game theory that follow rules. Right? Somebody will always try to game the system and figure out how to break rules. And once that happens, the rule breaking becomes rampant, and it spirals, and eventually we have violence. So this is how elite overproduction results in outbreak of violence.
Yep, no question about it. Okay, so what else did you see back in 2010?
We talked about two things so far. The popular immiseration, which creates this content, which can be now channeled by those elites who are willing to break rules, and let's call them counter elites, all right? So we have established elites who rule, and then counter elites, those who see that they are not gaining the positions they want, and they start breaking rules, and so they can channel popular discontent, which Donald Trump did very effectively, as we saw it. All right, remember the theory that a prediction came way before I knew anything about Donald Trump. It was 2010. All right. Second thing is the overproduction of wealthy elite aspirants. The third thing is that as popular immiseration increases and more people are in positions of what is now known as precarity, there is a great push, the force that induces people to escape precarity. And how do you do it if you don't have
What are you saying? What is that word you said again?
Precarity, precarious.
Precarity is actually precarity, like being precarious. I get it.
Sorry about my accent.
No problem.
So precarity is actually now a technical term. There's been books written about it. And essentially it shows that a large proportion of American population lives hand to mouth. They don't have any savings, and any little setback can actually create a catastrophe.
So we've heard the surveys, that a huge percentage of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency if their car breaks down, if whatever happens, right, have no money for that. So they're trying to escape their precarious situation. Go ahead about that.
Yes. So now let's talk about young, ambitious people who want to escape the precarious situation. How do you do that? Well, you go into college, university, and now the college degree, because 60% over 60% of high school graduates today go to college. That means that the college degree has been degraded, essentially. We can see that it's a reward. So now you have to go and get an advanced degree, like PhD, for example, law degree. Law degree is the most useful route to a politician career in the United States. So now, we have overproduction of the youth with advanced degrees, and there is not enough jobs for all of them. So, for example, why I focus on lawyers? It turns out that people with law degrees are the most dangerous profession from the point of view of revolution.
I think a lot of people listening will agree with you.
Yeah, well, but Lenin...
Was it Shakespeare that said, first thing we do is kill all the lawyers?
Yeah, exactly. Shakespeare. But if you look at it, Lenin was a lawyer, Castro was a lawyer, Maximilian Robespierre was, French Revolution was a lawyer, Gandhi was a lawyer, and so on. Abraham Lincoln, by the way, we can think about American Civil War as a kind of second American Revolution. He was a lawyer. So currently, we overproduce lawyers by a factor of 3 to 1, all right? And so what happens to the losing part is that they get salaries which are not even enough for them to pay off the loans that they got to complete the law school.
Well, I mean, a few people will disagree that college has become a complete scam. I mean, it's so overpriced. And I think mostly we can thank the government insuring student loans for this problem we're in. It's just an absolute disaster. But go ahead.
Yeah. But again, if you look at, let's say, long sweep, back in 1950, let's see, was it like 14% of the youth went to college. Now it's over 60%. It's not just because you can get student loans. It's because there is this push trying to escape precarity. All right. So you have overproduction of wealthy people and overproduction of people with advanced degrees. And all of that creates a huge pool of discontented losers, essentially. And historically, it's from that pool of discontented, frustrated elite aspirants is where the counter-elites arise, who organize revolutions, become radicals, drive civil wars, and things like that. And so that's what I saw back in 2010.
Yeah. Okay. What else should we know? Or are we ready to move on to where we're going with this?
Yeah. So now, exactly. So now we know about those major forces, and notice that I'm not, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very much sticking to a very neutral position. I'm not criticizing either Democrats or Republicans. In fact, I can say many critical things of both parties. So the reason is that it's not Joe Biden or Trump who are the causal agents of our trouble. They are the surface indicators of the deep trouble, the structural problems we've been discussing: popular immiseration and elite overproduction. All right, so that's what brought us into our current predicament. So how do we get out of it? Again, by looking at many different cases of previous societies that have got into crisis and emerged from it, we can learn from that. Unfortunately, whereas the road into crisis is quite channelized, it's like a ball rolling down a narrow valley. Once you get to the crisis, or maybe fortunately, there are all kinds of different roads out of crisis open up for you. And so sometimes this crisis result in outright collapse, more than half a population killed in a variety of ways, and so on and so forth. But there's also smaller number of cases where the societies actually manage to pull together and solve their problems. And how do they do it? Essentially, they shut down the wealth pump. So that means that what we need to do, by whatever policies, we need to bring back the growth of wages in line with the growth of productivity.
Right.
This will shut down the wealth pump and eventually reduce the number of uber wealthy. Also, it will reduce the number of people trying to escape from precarity. And so this is essentially how the deep down trends have been addressed in the past. And that's essentially what we need to do ourselves.
The problem is the wealth pump is being controlled by the wealthy, and they're not going to give it up. So the Federal Reserve is largely to blame. The fact that we even have a central bank is largely to blame for that. But it's the Cantillon effect. I mean, right? they're the closest to the money, so they control.
And that's why in the majority of cases, this crisis end up in some kind of a civil war or revolution. So more than in 60% of cases, there is civil war, and is equal number of cases of revolution. So because the established elites, things are so good for them that it is very difficult for them to sacrifice in order to rebalance the societies. But fortunately, but actually here, we have two cases of United States, right? United States have been in this similar situation twice before. The first one was during the 1850s, the end of the antebellum era, and that ended in the huge disaster of the American Civil War. But the second time America was in this revolutionary situation was around 1920, plus minus. So during this period, the first three decades of the 20th century, in fact, there was no revolution. There was a revolutionary situation, but there was no civil war, no revolution, because the American elites pulled together and resolved the situation. They stopped the wealth pump. This was done. They started doing things during the progressive era, and then that was all nailed, in stone by the New Deal. All right. So it's possible to do it without a major revolution. And that the New Deal arrangements led to the glorious 30 years after World War II, when American society and also Western European societies experienced historically unprecedented periods of broadly based affluence and well-being. So it's possible to do.
Yeah, but it's a very different world today, obviously. I mean, so much of this money is concentrated in big tech companies. I mean, venture capital has just ruined the landscape of business. It's just ruined it. Venture capital is a huge culprit because they fund these stupid businesses, really. I mean, like you look at a business like Uber that has never made a dollar, right? And WeWork. I mean, how can these stupid companies get funded, right? It's just a dysfunctional capital formation environment where you've got all these small businesses that are real businesses that make real profits, even though they're not scalable billions of dollars in profits, but collectively they certainly make that. They can't get funding. They don't get any money. So I just don't know how that ever changes,
Yeah, well, and that's the problem. That's why I'm worried about where we are. Many people think that the worst is past. The summer of riots in 2020, January 6th, 2021. But the problem is that the conditions, the trends continue to develop in the same direction. For example, there is up and downs in real wages, but right now it's going down because of inflation. The nominal wage does not keep increases, and nominal wage don't keep up with inflation. So this immiseration continues, and the production of overproduction of elite aspirants also continues. So nothing has been done. And I agree with you. 100 years ago, United States was a very different country. I'm not arguing that we should do another New Deal or something like that. I'm just saying that it's possible to avoid a revolution and civil war, and I hope that this is what will happen here with us. But it will require substantial sacrifice on the part of the ruling class. Yeah, and I just like you. I don't see this. I don't see that willingness.
They'll have massive PR campaigns saying this is socialism, it's wealth redistribution, et cetera, et cetera. And look, everybody has to understand, I'm coming from the perspective of a wealthy person, okay? I mean, I've got more than enough money. And I think it's wrong. I mean, there's just too much concentration of wealth. I really like the middle class. I grew up in the lower class, and I think you've got to have a big middle class if you want to have a stable country or a stable society. There's just no other way. And you hollow out that middle class, and
exactly, hollow out the middle class, and you create the situation where you have counter elites and large swaths of population immiserated. That's an explosive situation, because by themselves, let's think about the Middle Ages. The peasants are powerless. They can revolt, but then they're just killed off by armored knights. And today we have equivalent of armored knights. Just look at the police, riot police,
It's okay. The police in riot gear are the armored knights.
Think about what Tyler's revolt in 1380 in England, all right? The knights just rode them down and killed some of them, dispersed the rest, and hanged Tyler. So non-elites really don't have that much capacity to overthrow governments. It takes counter elites who provide organization and connections and energy to channel popular discontent.
Yeah. Maybe we can switch gears here and talk a little bit about demographics and the demographic cliff that I've been talking a lot about. I mean, you see marriage rates just plummeting, birth rates plummeting in most of the world, except for the few obvious places. What are your thoughts about that? How does that interplay with the macroeconomic picture, the societal picture, et cetera?
Well, first of all, keep in mind that Cliodynamics is trying to understand how societies work in many of its aspects. So economics is only part of it. You also need to understand politics and even things like climate change and so on and so forth. So economics is part of it. Now, back to your question. Yes, I saw that you had a recent podcast about the effect of demographic decline. Right. Now, I will actually argue the opposite side of the story.
Sure.
First of all, let me just emphasize that population declines have happened in history many times. And what they do, they typically are a powerful force that shuts down the wealth pump. So what is happening in the United States is, or in China, for example, everybody's talking about China population started to decline. I think this is the first year. And they're saying, oh, it's going to be a horrible thing. Well, it will cause some problems in the short run, but in the long run, what it does is that it reduces the labor supply, all right? And that drives businesses to pay higher wages. All right, so this is how it can this could be one of the factors that shuts down the wealth pump. So competition for jobs goes down, and businesses are competing for workers. All right, and so they have to bring the wages up. So
right,
that
the problem is they're you might want to blend into this conversation AI and automation and robotics and so forth, because I just don't know how that is going to play out. I've really struggled with it. You look at the past and all the technological advances have actually increased the size of the pie. They've increased the employment pool, the labor pool. But this time it may be different because we've all been amazed by what AI can do, and we're only going
So, for example, we talked about lawyers, overproduction of lawyers, 3-to-1. According to one study, 45% of what lawyers do can be automated by ChatGPT-4 right now.
Right.
So think about it. Now, instead of 3-to-1, we have 6 times as many contenders for these positions. So in the short run, this will create a lot of problem. But all right, but let's think about other possible negative effects of reduced fertility. People say that who will take care of the elderly? There are 2 factors we should consider. First of all, the life expectancy is increasing, and it's not increasing just so that people are very sick and dying, for years. The useful working life is also increasing. And so many people, I am, for example, 66. I have no intention of retiring from what I do. And many other people who are in their 60s or even 70s, they're perfectly energetic and they don't want just to sit watching TV. And so that's one factor. And the second factor is the AI. So taking care of very old people can be automated, just turning a person in a bed, right? It's a very hard physical job, but that can be done by a robot. We don't have quite such robots yet, but the technology is there. So one caretaker equipped with robots essentially can take care of 10 old people easily enough. So that's another factor. So that's where AI actually has a silver lining, because that's the technology.
There are all kinds of benefits that'll come from it, of course. I mean, no one would argue that. But there's also a lot of job losses that'll come from it too, at least initially.
Well, we have to manage it as a society. So we should race not against the machines, but we should race with the machines.
Yeah.
All right. Many of the things that robots are replacing people, but they're also replacing many of the bad jobs, dirty and dangerous jobs that we don't want people to actually perform. So it's AI can be a huge wealth pump, but controlling it is what has to be done at the society level.
Yeah. I mean, the type of stuff that AI is doing now already is truly amazing. I mean, I can see so many jobs that will just be wiped out from AI. And then when we get to the point of the self-driving cars, that's just a giant part of the labor force that it's just going to be a massive change.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. Okay, is there anything else you want to leave our audience with? Any questions I didn't ask you, or anything else you want people to know?
Yeah, let me just end on this note that we have obviously made quite a lot of strides with Cliodynamics. We have now a much better understanding why societies get into end times. But this is just the beginning of the road. We really need to do a much better science. We need social engineering, really. How come we spend a lot of money on health research, which is good, right? Because we want to be healthy. We also spend a lot of money on environmental science because we want to live in healthy environments, but we also want to live in healthy societies. And to do that, we need to really put a lot of effort. Bright people should go into this field. We need to collect more historical data because we need the ability to test theories, and we need to develop those mathematical models to the point where you could use them in suggesting what are good, for example, policies, and what are bad policies. So this is the job of models to tell us what are the unintended negative consequences of any particular policies and actions. So that's what I would like to maybe end with, is that with the plea to put much more effort and resources into developing the science of societies.
Yeah. Peter, give out your website.
PeterTurchin.com.
PeterTurchin.com. The books are available in all the usual places, and they have excellent reviews, very interesting work. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jason.